Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die book. And today we are looking at the Monkees' 1967 album, Headquarters. According to the book, Headquarters by the Monkees was released under the RCA Victor label, produced by Douglas Farthing-Hat Lillard, with art direction uncredited, nationality UK and USA, with a running time of 36 minutes and 14 seconds. When it comes to the Monkees, even at the time of this album's release and in the current day, it is very easy to just write them off as a Beatles knockoff band and a cheap imitation of the bands of the time, as their bubblegum pop sound is very similar to what the Beatles were doing in the early 60s. And the entirety of the Monkees did come out of a TV show that was meant to be if the Beatles had their own show. It's sort of showing the life of this new band that is kind of like the Fab Four themselves. But even still, it would be kind of foolish to just simply write them off as just a Beatles knockoff band, as with Headquarters, when given complete creative control over most of their music here, they do manage to make a record all on their own that still sounds unique enough and original enough to the Monkees without feeling like it's just a derivative of the Beatles themselves. The Beatles' influence is still very much there, and you can hear it on many of the tracks off of this album, except that this time it feels like they have taken a bit of a backseat, and the Monkees' creative control is stronger than that of the Beatles' influence. And the Monkees' own experimentation with music is unique to them at the end of the day. Like my two favorite songs off of this album, Forget That Girl and Shades of Grey, definitely feel like they have their own unique persona to the Monkees and make a strong case for their own artistic abilities. Forget That Girl is just an incredibly well-written and subtle song that I really just enjoy the simple vocals to as well. It kind of adds to the laid-back feeling, but at the same time there's a lot of emotional punch to this song, even with how direct and simple the lyrics are. I find it to be a very potent song as well, with its emotional message that it kind of hits you with, but it's not like it's something we haven't heard before. It's just done in a very well-polished way, in a much more subtle way than some of the Beatles' work or some other members at the time. And Shades of Grey is perhaps the best vocally performed song on this entire album, with having very hushed, slow, and gentle vocals that are over the beautiful instrumentation. It is a much softer song than most of the songs on here, but it is also one of the most beautiful songs on here, and I think really does compete with some of the best early Beatle work. The entire atmosphere of Shades of Grey, in my opinion, is very heartwarming and just beautiful. So I'll take more songs like that any day of the week over most of the Beatles' early work. Sorry I keep comparing to the Beatles, but the comparisons are very much a common issue with the Monkees. And it's not like the Beatles are the only influence on this album, as the song Mr. Webster, another fantastic song in my opinion, feels very much like it takes a lot of influence from Simon and Garfunkel rather than the Beatles, as the vocal delivery and just the instrumentation feels very much similar to songs like Sound of Silence or Mrs. Robinson in terms of just its overall style, which is not at all a bad thing because the Monkees still kind of twist it and make it their own unique original take, but you can definitely hear the Paul Simon influences that are coming in strong on this track. But with these heavily influenced tracks and these very sweet, slow, and gentle songs, you do get a lot of songs where I find the Monkees are showing a bit more of their experimentation and a bit more of their uniqueness. Especially when you get to the song Zilch, which I'm not sure if I'd even call it a song, as it's less of a song and more of a skit, but even still, it is one of my favorite parts of the album, as Zilch has all these different phrases being repeated throughout by each member. Most of these phrases sounding completely weird, random, and just out there in terms of what they're saying. It's something that you have no connectivity to, but they do sound like something that would be common phrases. For example, you have the phrases like Mr. Dabalina, Mr. Bob Dabalina, China Clipper calling Alameda, never mind the furthermore the plea is self-defense, it is in my opinion that the people are intending, and these strange repeated phrases carry up for about 40-50 seconds of the track here, and even though there's no instrumentation, they overlap one another, and all these different phrases become one mushed singular sound and just kind of overlap one another. And I like this because apparently a lot of these phrases were things that the Monkees heard while touring, and they sort of just took them from everyday life around them. And with the track itself being called Zilch, it feels like they're saying that these phrases mean absolutely nothing, but we are applying meaning to them, much as people might take this song and apply a lot of meaning to it when there really is none. It's almost like a parody of sorts of people who overanalyze lyrics or overanalyze words, when at the end of the day, these things are very simple and direct. At least that's what I interpret from the song, and I kind of liked that kind of message to it. And on top of that, I found myself repeating a lot of these phrases just in everyday life when I wasn't listening to the album, because they do kind of stick in your head and play on loop after hearing it so many times. It's sort of hypnotic in a way. But the biggest weakness of the album, the greatest weakness that this album takes, is the fact that it was released in 1967. Way later than it was really due its time, because you have a lot of albums coming out in 1967 that are way past the style and genre that is being done here, and there's a very distinct direction that music is taking at this point, and the Monkees feel behind in that direction. Keep in mind that in 1967, we did have bands like the Velvet Underground, The Doors, and Pink Floyd all releasing their debut albums, taking a much more unique and different approach to music that was hitting the mainstream and kind of changing the musical landscape. And on top of that, in 1967, the Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, which itself was a massive and grand album, especially today still. And the Monkees coming out the same year with Headquarters feels very strange and just behind in terms of what they're doing here, which is really unfortunate, because I think Headquarters, if it came out in the early 60s, would be considered way more influential and way more important to the music scene, but unfortunately it came out at the end of the 60s. So because of that, it does take a lot of hit, because it's kind of hard to call it original when most of this has already been done, especially with the Beatles doing Rubber Soul in 1964, which was already like the peak of this genre. So Headquarters, unfortunately, is outdated at the time of its release. So overall, the rating of this album came to a soft rating of 7.5, but I will go ahead and harden it down to a 7 out of 10, as again, even though I do enjoy the sweetness of this album and the very simple directness of this album, a lot of it isn't very unique or original at the time. It was already outdated as soon as it was released. So it's truly unfortunate that that is the case, and it would have been far better if it released in the early 60s, but the Monkees weren't there yet. And because I think that there are better albums than this one before this album even released, and the influence that came off of this album isn't as high as the other albums within this same genre, I will go ahead and say that it isn't essential. So non-essential. Definitely listen to it if you just want something sweet and enjoyable to listen to, but otherwise you don't need to listen to it before you die, and you're really not missing out on too much if you miss this whole record. But definitely, I do think if you just want something gentle, go ahead and give this a listen. There's no harm in that. It's only half an hour long after all. That pretty much does it for this review. Let's go ahead and see what the next album we're going to listen to is. Alright, 1 to 1001, Generate. 424 is the next album. 424. 424 is X-Ray Specs, Germ-Free Adolescence. So go ahead and listen to X-Ray Specs, Germ-Free Adolescence. That pretty much does it for this video. If you like the video, please hit like and please hit subscribe to follow along in listening to every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die. New videos every Tuesday and Friday for this series. So thank you for watching. This has been Randy Joe, signing off. And shades of gay?